Welcome to the Cult of Conversation. I'm Chad Schmidt, the Mennonite atheist. The following is a conversation with one of my best friends, Ryan Weeds. He's a therapist, a thinker, a Cult of Conversation blogger, and much more. The topic is the laws of logic, and it's a response video to a conversation I had with my family, my mom, my dad, and my sister, in which I used one of the laws of logic, the Law of Excluded Middle, to help me not only explain why I'm an atheist, but also to better explain the method I use to arrive at my beliefs and disbeliefs. While my atheism was not as controversial as I expected in the end, to my surprise, we ended up focused on whether this law of logic applied to their theism and their beliefs, and to reality in general, as I insisted that it did. I introduced the laws of logic because I assumed they would provide some obvious common ground between us. I was hoping it would be like asking them to agree that 2 + 2 = 4, since the laws of logic are in fact the basis for math. If the statement 2 + 2 = 4 is true, it is because the laws of logic are true. If you're making sense, I argued, it's because you're obeying the laws of logic, and I don't think there is any good reason to doubt them. That said, my dad and sister, I think understandably in retrospect, felt like the laws put them in a straitjacket, that they oversimplified rather than accurately reflected reality. They felt like life is more vague, more complicated, less black and white than these laws seem to suggest. They also perhaps felt like I was trying to use the laws to pigeonhole their beliefs or force them to admit that they believe something they do not. I couldn't shake this perception. I think it seemed to feel to them like I was taking a position of authority over them rather than that I was consciously utilizing these laws to enhance our ability to more accurately understand ourselves and each other. The combo feeling that there was a power struggle and that these laws didn't seem to match reality as they know it added up to an interesting conversation, but it left us at a dead end of sorts. The problem? I was and am saying that the resistance to accepting the laws of logic is an exercise in futility, plain and simple. A claim that may inspire resistance, even if it's true. My claim is that my dad and sister were using the laws, in every effort they made to refute those laws. And, more importantly, that the laws of logic provide us with some common ground for better and more honest conversations on questions of truth and belief. As Thomas Nagel points out, if you try to refute the laws of logic, you'd need to use them to do so. In other words, the project is self-refuting. The laws could only be proven wrong if they are correct. Again, if you're making sense, it's because you're obeying the laws of logic. And so I believe a more conscious use of them will only enhance our shared ability for honesty and self-discovery. So in other words, what my interlocutors feel is their challenge to what I'm saying is actually a challenge to what they're saying. They're engaged in a self-refutation without knowing it. At least that's my claim. They're making sense by using the laws while trying to refute the laws they're using in order to demonstrate their failure. I think it's a case of looking one's gift horse in the mouth. My goal for this whole channel is to encourage dialogue on questions of truth in the arena of religion and philosophy. And so what could be more important than finding common ground between those who disagree? The laws of logic, I believe, provide us all with a starting place for an honest investigation of truth, no matter how much we disagree on a given topic or truth claim. If you want to keep what you truly believe hidden from yourself and others, the laws of logic will not be your friend. So I think this is an important conversation. I think where we land together on this issue really matters. In the end, my argument to those who feel resistant to accepting the truth value of the laws of logic is pretty simple. If you reject them, you are doing so only because you don't understand them fully yet. That said, your willingness to keep challenging the truth value is a worthy project, a courageous one, in fact. If they're untrue, I want to know. So this video is a follow-up attempt to clarify, defend, and hopefully better represent what are often called in philosophy the logical absolutes. I'm no philosopher, I'm at best a dilettante, and I get things wrong all the time. so I'm open to correction and welcome feedback and rebuttals from experts and fellow dilettantes and anybody else. Ryan and I have had a variety of conversations on this topic since the original video. In this one, he plays the generous role of an interrogator. Ryan's pushback, I think, represents well the kinds of arguments I've met with from other friends and family, though I think he's more curious about my motivation for promoting the laws of logic than he is interested in questioning their truth value. I've cut out a variety of sections in which we were off topic or having recording issues, including the opening. So it starts off in midstream like, boom, here are the laws, as if you've walked into a classroom mid-lesson. My apologies for this and any lack of technological sophistication. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I do realize how lame this introduction was. I'll get better. I'm learning. So let's get right to the topic. So this is basically, in a nutshell, the laws of logic, and the argument. Like, my argument would be that these are self-evidently true. Like, I've never seen a way around them. Now, I'm always open for like somebody to show me an example where they don't work, but these are really just representation, the most basic attempts to represent reality. All I really feel like I need to demonstrate that they're true is to make the claim that I'm certain I exist. That's the only thing I would say I'm certain about, which is that I exist. I don't know what that means. I mean, maybe I'm in the matrix, maybe it's an illusion. But if I exist as an illusion in that case, but I still exist. So that's the sort of starting place, I would say, for knowledge, in my case at least. And the laws of logic stem from that. If I exist, I don't not exist. And so that's the first place to begin as far as logic goes. I either exist or I don't exist. If I exist, I don't not exist. And you can build from there. I found an epistemology that has these as the grounding principles, beginning with the certainty that you exist. Do you follow that? Does some of that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the law, again, you know this stuff. You don't need me to teach you like the law of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. But they're really about the key to understanding them is just understanding the nature of negation. So like one of the things I remember my dad finding confusing about it is he felt like it was black and white thinking. Well, black and not black is what it's really about, not black and white. Black and white and black and white are just different things, right? They don't fit into this. Black is one of the things that's not white. But there are an infinite number of things that are not white. However you define white, whatever is white. So in other words, the one that we've had the most interested in discussing is the law of excluded middle, obviously. Most people, when you say A equals A, they're like, well, that seems like a stupid thing to say. Right? Like, obviously, A is A. Well, that's all you should say when you see that A equals A, is you should say, well, yeah, that makes... what else could A be than A? And then A, non-contradiction, A does not equal not A. And then excluded middle, everything is A and not A. Nothing can be excluded from being A and not A. There are only two options. You're either something or it's negation. You can't, or something it's not. You can't, there's no middle ground. There's no third alternative. And I think what I was saying is my dad and my sister and others, yourself included, maybe, and a few other friends have seen that as black and white, maybe, or as not actually a reasonable description of how they feel about themselves. And what I'm saying is these are, to me, these are self-evident truths. They're non-threatening. They're not dualistic. There's no dualism here. It's more that the logic of what I would call logic of negation, where it's like if you understand negatives, it's not talking about binaries. Binaries are different than dichotomies. A dichotomy is A and not A. So like black and white are not everything that is black is black and everything that is not is not. It's the opposite of black is white, but it's not the negation of black, not conceptually.
Right.
So if you understand negation, this is not about dualism or about pigeonholing anybody that they have to be X or Y. Whether they like it or not, they are X or Y. That's the claim. They can't be anything else and be reasonable. So if you've ever made sense in your life, you are making sense because you are obeying one of these laws. If you've ever made sense. And so most people, when they're making sense, don't know anything about these laws expressed this way. And laws obviously don't determine whether something's logical. Things are logical, and these are the way we represent that logic. So for example, what I think happens often is, I don't know, a good metaphor you could use is that the metaphor of an ant who sees a centipede. An ant looks at his legs and goes, 6 of them. That it makes sense why I can control all 6. But how the hell does that guy control 100 or 100 of them? And so he goes to the centipede and says, hey, how the hell are you tracking all of these different movements all at once? And as soon as he starts thinking about it, he can't move his legs properly. So I do think it's the same thing with these laws, where people see them and they've been doing them their whole life. They've been, every time they've made sense, they've been following these laws. But then when they try to become conscious of them, they stop being able to move their legs properly and doubt themselves, or doubt the logic they've been using their whole life. So to me, I do take these as self-evidently true, as the closest thing I can say to absolutes. I don't believe that certainty is possible. I can't imagine how these could be broken. I've never seen an example where they are. Even at the quantum level, people often talk about something existing and not existing at the same time. And I'm not sure that we don't know whether that's really what's going on, but it wouldn't necessarily negate these things as true on our level of experience anyways, whether the quantum level breaks these laws or not. So this is it. That's all it is in a nutshell. Any thoughts about this? I know you already kind of know most of this stuff, but any thoughts on this? This is the one that's hard for people right here, because it basically means that whatever you put in A, there's no other option. Everything else is not that.
Yeah. And and I wonder if maybe some of the reactions that are coming up, or where some of my reactions are coming from, is maybe partly in the context of the conversation that it came up in, which was about belief, right?
Right, sure. And why do you think belief, it feels more confusing with belief than anything else? Because like for me, I don't relate to that, but it seems to be that belief is harder to track. I think I can understand it. Like why do you think belief?
Well, maybe for a few reasons. Maybe one may be that people may mean different things when they're using that word, and maybe different things at different times.
Which word? Which word?
The word belief.
Oh, I see. Sure.
Like I'm thinking about how someone, for like a Christian, might feel quite uncertain as to whether or not something is true or not, and of course still believe.
Yeah. So it depends how you define belief. Obviously, whatever the definition is, though, the definition precedes the explication or the practice of these rules. So whatever the definition is as long as you keep that definition across the board, these rules still apply. But I get what you're saying. So like if for me, the definition of belief is just whether you're convinced or not. If you're convinced, you believe, right? So,
right.
Whether or not I see knowledge as a subset of belief. To me, knowledge is sort of like, I really, really, really believe it's true. Right? Like it's the metaphor I've used before is the difference between an idea that is a caterpillar versus is a butterfly versus a caterpillar. So a caterpillar is a butterfly in potential, sort of, right? It is, and that's a belief, but a belief that is a butterfly, like it's a transitional thing. There's a point at which you might say, well, we can say we know this. The only thing, right? So I don't think certainty is a thing, except for statements of it, of that I exist. That's I think the only thing I would feel comfortable saying I'm certain of. So I don't know.
Right.
So if that's the definition, I think that's what I'm usually working with, whether you believe or not. Is there a way? Is there a definition where that you think doesn't fit into this model? Because the claim is that everything fits into this model, right? Everything is A or not A. Is there a way to define it that would, where this wouldn't work? Is that the suspicion?
Well, I think maybe I wonder if part of it may be that some of these experiences are things that play out over time, and in this in a sense where there are things changing from day to day, or over the process of time, where someone may be moving in a particular direction. And like I can think of my own history of belief, and moving away from Christian belief would have been something that happened very organically, in the sense that it wasn't a sudden, clear break. And where I was, where one day I was one and the next day I was not the other, but more.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I'm wondering where you're getting the impression that this has to do with suddenness. Like, so that's where I think there's a breakdown in how we're thinking about this, because I don't think the speed has anything. There's no time factor where this is reflective.
That's what I mean. Well, I mean, I feel like it's kind of they may be snapshots in particular moments in time. Like maybe,
yeah. And, at any given time, you are what you are at that time. So if you add the time factor to the definition, it still works. So, for example, there was a time, there have been times, is probably more accurate, where if A equals being a theist, I'm in A. I fit into that category, but I don't currently. But I am. But I was what I was at those moments, and I am what I am now at this moment, regardless of what I am in 2 seconds. Right? It's not. So the rule is timeless in that sense. Time is irrelevant to this in a way.
Yeah. So, no, I think you can always say, yes, the rule, it will always work, but whether it really fits with our, whether it fits or makes sense in the context of self-understanding, or how we understand, how we define ourselves.
Well, I don't think you can have a conversation without this. Like, I don't think conversations happen without these rules happening. So like if I ask you right now what you believe about something, and you say, I'm on the fence, well, then you're not A, right? You're not in the fence, right? You're on the fence. And on the fence, by definition, is not in the fence. So it's like, where you are at this moment, which is not certain or not convicted one way or the other. For example, as an example, not you personally, I just mean as an example of where people sometimes think there's a third alternative to A and not A. So there can't be logically an alternative to A and not. Something can't be itself and not itself at the same time, or in the same way. And so definitions and time matter, of course. So if somebody who's like, if you define somebody who believes as somebody who's in the fence of belief, inside the zone of belief, the in is very helpful because any other preposition you use means you're not in.
Right.
If on does not mean in, it means something different than in. So it's not in. If in is a is equals in, then on is not in. So the middle ground, there's no middle ground on because it's the concept of a negation. So on is very different than outside. If a equals outside, then on is not outside either. But in is not outside, and on are not outside, so they're both not a in that case, right? So if a is outside, on and in are not outside. They're not a.
Right. Well, one of the things that I'm kind of, one of the things that can come up in a Catholic context is that any individual, because there is a sense of identity that has to do with belonging to a body, like the body of the church. Yep. There is a sense that on any given day, a person may not be able to really fully identified with the creed.
Okay.
And may not believe it, and still feel like they can say it with the idea that the belief, I'm kind of carrying on, kind of being carried along by the belief of other people.
Okay, so then what's an A is a totally different belief, right? So your belief that that's just a different A. You're just relocating A to a different thing.
I know. I know that this is always going to work. It just doesn't. If you're asking, like, do you believe or do you not believe? I'm wondering if sometimes that's part of what is the challenge there.
Well, I understand the politics of why people wouldn't want to answer that question, but they can't be one or, it just logically. So in that case, if somebody that day is not feeling like they really can honestly say they believe that the creed is true to reality, for example, mm-hmm. But right. They still are convicted that it's valuable for them to do so, and they're going to count that. So whether if A is they're saved or not is a different question from whether they believe or not. In that case, right. It's just like, so A is those who are saved. Well, that's A is all those in the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. In this case, everybody is either in the body of Christ or they're not. That's it. It's not trying to tell you have to believe something, one or the other. And I think that's the temptation in what your behind your argument. It feels like there's this sense of resistance to being told what you are, where that's not what's happening. It's not telling you what you are. It's asking you what you are, and then making sure that we understand what you are and what you're not. That's it. And so it places you in the position of vulnerability, right? Because you, if you say, well, I don't know, I don't really feel like I can take a position. Well, then you're not A, right? That's by definition not a believer if A equals believer. And so it's a fair position, but it's not a third alternative to not A or to A. There's only A or not A. Right? Everything is either A or not A. So if A is believing and you're on the fence and you're not convinced either way, you're not A. You're one of the people who's not convinced either way, and that's not A.
I guess that's the thing, is that somebody may be there and not distinguish themselves from believers.
Say that. I don't understand that first part. May be there.
Maybe, and it may see, like, for example, a continuum of what belief means. Like, a belief may mean that I have a degree of certainty about these propositions,
Sure.
I have very little degree of certainty about these propositions, but I do feel like they're propositions that, or a story that's worth living by. And
But that's a different, now you just shifted out of from, so what I would say in logic is that's an equivocation. So instead of sticking with the question of whether there's a degree of certainty or not, you're shifting to whether you want to live by it or not. If you value it enough to live by it, and that's what A is, then you're either somebody who values that values a world, values the idea of living by it, or you're not.
Well, no, I think that what may be kind of at stake sometimes is that there is a community that is forming around a story, and there may be quite a considerable degree of diversity within that community, and also within an individual at any particular point in time, that may make it kind of hard to figure out how to answer that question.
No, I think it's always very easy. I think it's a misunderstanding to do what you're saying there. Like that's not what it's doing. Like, it's a misunderstanding of these laws, because I would call that like a straw man of the law. You're making the laws say more than they're trying to say themselves. So, well,
I don't think I'm not arguing against the law at all.
Oh, okay.
So
then what are we doing? Like, if my point is just, I'm feeling like that I don't understand the resistance to accepting these laws as self-evident. And I'm not sure what I'm fighting for then.
Right. Well, I think that I guess maybe what I'm wondering about is where they are kind of universal laws, right?
Yeah, these are universal, absolutely.
Yeah,
they're not ontological in nature. They tell you nothing about the essence of anything. They just tell you that they're universal, but not ontological in their orientation.
Well, and maybe that's part of what the struggle is that sometimes the struggle is where am I? Ontologically, what am I?
Sure, but it can answer those questions too. So, for example, we don't know what. I don't think it's reasonable for anybody to claim to know anything ontologically. Like, I think that's nonsensical to pretend to know what we are. Like, when we see things, we're not seeing those things, so we don't know what they are in themselves. We know what how our brain reconstructs them by taking light and reimagining them, but that's a fabrication. What we see is a fabrication of the thing. We don't see the thing itself. So we've never seen anything as it is in itself. So it's not a claim about the nature of reality. Anybody who thinks they know the nature of reality, I don't know how to me, that's a lack of humility. That's just, they're not really being responsible intellectually, even ethically, to pretend to. And so I don't trust ontological claims. All this can tell us is if you believe that matter is some kind of actual physical thing, whatever that means, I don't even know what that would mean. Science never pretends to have an answer to any ontological claim itself. But if you believe that reality is actually spiritual, then you're either somebody who believes that reality is spiritual, or you're not. You can't be both at once. You can be on the fence, but if you're on the fence, then you're not somebody who's inside the fence, right? Like, everybody is either on the fence to some degree, whatever you determine is the nature of the fence, or you're not. So it's not telling you what to believe. It's saying whatever you believe is what you believe. Identity, whatever you believe is not the opposite. Is not equal to not A. Like, what you believe is not what you believe, and everybody either believes what you believe or they don't. They believe something else, and it could be an infinite number of possible options that are not A.
Right.
It's on the spectrum of infinity, right? Like if it's not white, it could be green, it could be blue, it could be green blue, it could be an infinite number of possible things. So that's the argument. And then the way that I tried to represent that was the following way to my sister. I said the three problems she and my dad identified were what I called total douchebag, is in the first one. Warm, hot, cold, which is the problem of vagueness, which is actually a philosophical problem, and then the problem of the false dichotomy, black and white thinking. So these were the accusations that I heard about these that I think are misunderstandings. And then so I try to show that my dad is a theist and Satan is a theist. Well, does he want to be associated with Satan? No. But are they both theists? Yes. You're either a theist or you're not. You don't have to be a nice theist to be a theist.
Right.
You can be, Osama bin Laden and be a theist. And my dad has in common that one on that front. If A is you're a theist or you're not a theist. And that's not a threat to him being a different kind of theist than somebody else. Right. So like in that sense, your Catholic example is interesting because their belief is actually not what's at question. It's whether you're saved. It just shifts the location of what you're investigating. And whatever you're investigating, if you shift it, then you can't apply to one A this and then shift to a different A and use that rule. It doesn't work. It has to be specific.
So what do you mean specific? You mean like the definition has to be very specific?
Yeah, it's like, so it can be long and complicated in a sense.
Right.
So doesn't have to be simple, but it could be a list of 7 million things, and everything that is those 7 million things is those 7 million things, and everything that is not those 7 million things is not those 7 million things, and everything is either those 7 million things or it's not. Right? So they just feed on one another. There's no sort of accusation that you can't be complicated or you can't be vague about what you believe or feel. You can feel whatever it is you feel, to whatever gradation that you feel, and it's irrelevant to whether these laws apply to you or not. You're not escaping them by being complicated. And there's no reason to escape them because they're not a prison. They're a description that happens after the fact. So what I showed my sister was the following image. Obviously, you can't see it while you're cooking oatmeal, so don't worry about it. Yeah. But
tell me, what do you think? What do you think your dad and your sister are kind of reacting to there?
I don't know. I can guess. I could venture a guess. I know what I felt like when I was a theist, and I didn't want to be two things. I didn't want to be associated with fundamentalism or some other thing, which has nothing to do with whether you're a theist or not. You can be a liberal theist. You can be a fundamentalist theist. And so what my dad doesn't like is being pigeonholed, and I don't blame him for that. He felt like it pigeonholes him.
Yes, right.
It isn't, but that's the feeling he gets from it. And that feeling is what I'm saying is not trustworthy. That feeling is tricking him into thinking that he's being forced to be something rather than he's being helped to understand something. So in other words, but I also think like it's an associative problem. He doesn't want to be associated with certain things. So he's like, well, can't I be over here on A? Can't I be like, on this side of the circle? And that's not what that means. You haven't understood the logical absolutes. It means that's not how it works. You're either A or you're not A. You're not on the edge of A.
Right.
Then somebody who's on the edge of A is not A because you're somebody who's on the edge of A. People who are on the edge of A are either there's everybody else, those who are A and not A, right? But they're all not A, not on the edge. So there's only two options no matter what you do. And it's not something worth escaping because it's not a prison. So I think it was just, so for my sister, my best guess would be that she doesn't feel entirely like she fits into some specific category.
Right.
And so being called A and like a mathematical formula doesn't make her feel like it's accurate. And I also don't think she wants to really have to think she's A or not A, because if she, I think she's possibly not A. And she has all of her community and all of her friendships are assuming she's A, and a lot of those relationships depend on that. There's a lot at risk. And there's a lot at risk in saying, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm on the fence. That's a risky proposition in this context, because that means she's not A, she's not a theist. If she's on the fence. If A is theism and you're on the fence, you're not a theist. A theist, you're either a theist or you're not.
Well, what if it's, what if it's more like, what if it's kind of like being on a road where you have a pretty good idea, you have an idea about what's right around the corner, but you don't know. And so like theism is around the corner, and like I'm on the fence, so I don't know, but I'm inclined to think that that is the case.
Well, then you're not on the fence. I mean,
right.
Yeah, then you're inclined in one direction, and incline means you're leaning one way or the other.
Right.
So that's not on the fence. Nobody can be on the fence and be in the fence at the same time. So you're either leaning or you're not. Right? Like, if you're not leaning, right, in a direction. So like if you're 50%, you're not in the fence, you're on the fence. If 50% is what you decide is what you mark off as the point of belief, wherever you determine, whatever your definition is for where the line of belief begins,
right,
it has a beginning. Sorry, I don't know what, like, it's nonsensical to say it doesn't have a beginning, that there's a point of belief. So is there a difference between somebody who feels 100% certain and somebody who feels 51% certain? Yeah. Are they theists? Yes. Their difference is irrelevant to the question of theism. It's a difference. Then we're asking what everybody who's 100% convinced is 100% convinced, and everybody else is not 100% convinced. If A equals you're 100% convinced, then almost everybody who's a theist is not A.
Right.
Right. So, but that's not the question of theism. The question is do you believe? Are you a theist? Do you believe? And whatever your conviction, whatever your definitive point is, somebody who's on the fence, and this is why this is important, is because I wanted to be honest about what I believed, and why this was a relief was I could say, no, I'm not convinced. And that's what I define as atheism, but I don't have to be convinced that there is no God to be unconvinced that there is a God. Right? I don't have to commit to the idea that there is no God to reject the claim that there is a God, or to believe that there is a God. And so that's why that's really important, is because I could be honest and say, no, I don't believe. If not believing means I have to believe the opposite, then I couldn't be honest and say that, right? And this allows you to be really clear about those category distinctions.
So so that kind of category distinction allows you to kind of say, I don't believe there is a God, and I have no idea if there is or isn't.
Yeah, well, how would I know whether a God exists or not? I'm not convinced. I don't see a good reason to believe it. So I'm not a theist. And anybody who has doubts can still be a theist. I mean, no matter how many doubts you have, if you're still convinced, if you still lean or inclined, and a lot of people talk about this. I remember being this person. I remember various times where I'd go be on one side of this and leaning the other one way and then the other the next day. And that transition is irrelevant to whether at those moments this model is helpful or not. So on a day where you and I were in India, for example, and we were really working through I think the coolest stuff at the time as a kid. Like to me, that was a really monstrous event as far as like trying to think through what I really thought. I was all by myself half the time. Like
Yeah.
when you were in when I was in I can't remember
Malawi.
when I went to the Maldives, right?
Yeah.
And you went to that ashram, remember?
Right. Yeah.
So I remember thinking, I'm free to think whatever I want. I don't have anybody's eyes on me, and I can actually kind of evaluate. I didn't know to have any of this stuff. This wasn't there for me at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I would have liked it. I don't think this would have jived with me. I think I would have felt the same way as my sister does. But that's in part because I was excited about not having to be clearly defined. That doesn't mean I wasn't on certain questions, like on any question. I was defined as whatever I was, right? Like I was what it was at every moment. But I understand why people don't like it. But I don't think their liking or disliking it has any effect on whether it's true or not. And that's what's exciting about this to me is that it's not dependent on my feeling of whether it's true or not. It operates independently from me. And so when somebody feels like they don't want to have to say what they really think, this is not a super comforting conversation. And when they feel like there are blurred lines, they think it's telling them they're not. But it's not true. So like with the first one, my argument against why my dad sensed that he was not a theist like other theists is irrelevant to the question, right? It's my God loves everyone equally is kind of what he's saying, but his doesn't, right?
Right.
His doesn't, or whatever. He's not.
Right.
He's not some fundamentalist, hardcore God who hates homosexuals and sees women as less than men. And I don't like the association. That's fair. That's fair, but it's not relevant to the question of whether you're a theist or not. It's not. You're not understanding the concepts if you think that makes you somewhere outside of A as a theist. What it does do is say you are the person who believes that this God, if that's A, if we make that A, then none of these people are in that category with you. Then you're free. Then you're freed from having to be the association. But that's just
Right.
about your comfort level, not about whether, like, if I ask you if you're a theist, and I ask Osama bin Laden whether he's a theist or not, are you both going to say yes? You are. You're A. You don't have to like the association at all. Your preference is irrelevant. This isn't poetry, right? Where it's something different. It's a different way of using language. So Gandhi, Osama bin Laden, Satan, and Mother Teresa are theists. Whether it doesn't matter what God they believe in. If theism equals a belief in a God, I could be defined as a theist, right? If trees are gods, then I'm a theist because I believe trees exist. I just don't think that's a very useful definition of what a theist is. So I could be defined as a theist if theism includes believing that trees are gods. Now, if you mean by God that trees have a supernatural spiritual element to them, then I don't believe that, but I do believe trees exist. Right. So,
right.
Right. So if you define God as energy, so like, for example, Howard, if I were, I don't want to bring up names here, but different people, if I say, what do you think God is like? And they come up with a metaphor, they feel like it's energy or love or mystery or whatever. It's not, doesn't matter how you understand God. If you believe a God exists and you define that as theism as believing a God exists, the nature of that God is irrelevant to that question. If your question is, do you believe that God is energy? Then maybe they're going to, then you're A, and maybe Mother Teresa doesn't buy that, right? And then
well, and that would be where, for example, with that kind of a belief, where it becomes very confusing about, I don't believe in a supernatural God. I believe God is energy.
Okay, it does. So if that's your definition, if that's your definition, then then I believe, then I'm a theist, right? Because I believe energy exists. I just don't see the functional relevance of using the term God for that term when we already have a term for it. Energy. Energy is sufficient as a term on its own. If you believe that energy has consciousness in it, and that's what makes it God, then I don't believe that your God exists. I'm not convinced, right? I'm not saying that energy doesn't have consciousness in it. I'm just saying I don't see a good reason to believe that.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm one of the non-believers. There are people who would say that that's garbage. I think it is, but that doesn't, if somebody says there is no consciousness in energy, I don't have to agree with them to be not A on the question of energy. Is God energy? We're both not A. I'm just a different type of not A than him.
Right.
And so there are millions of different possible not A's in that case. It doesn't pigeonhole me to anything. It helps me determine my relationship to one question.
Right.
That's it. And that's it. So anyway, so that's the question of the douchebag problem. What I call the douchebag problem. It's the frustration over being associated, and that's an ethical problem. I don't want to have to be associated with theists, all theists. I'm a different kind of theist. Well, that's great, but you're evading one particular question: are you a theist or not? And that's it.
Well, I wonder, but I mean, I think part of that is also, do you really understand me here? And what are what kind of context are you putting me in this conversation?
Say that again. So do you feel like, I think I missed
your dad not wanting that association.
Why does he not want that association?
Pardon me?
What did you say? Why does he not want that association?
Well, no, your dad not wanting that association is kind of about how he's wanting to be understood, right?
Yeah, right.
And
he was looking for reassurance that that I still liked him, right? That even though he believed in God, right? Like
just because you believe these things, does that mean that you are in this? In what sense, because on the one hand, you're saying you are with these guys.
Yeah, no, I am absolutely. He is, as a statement of fact, that all of these people have in common something that's not relevant to their ethics. It's not. I'm not asking, are you a moral theist?
Right.
I'm just asking if you're a theist. And, and if you want to ask whether you're a moral theist or not, I have no problem with my dad saying he's a moral theist. I agree. I think he's great. I think he's a wonderful guy. It's not me trying to say he's Satan. That's ridiculous, right? But people are uncomfortable with, Christians might be uncomfortable with the idea that they have in common with Satan a belief in God.
Right.
Right. Which is silly.
At that point they wouldn't have, but
right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So or that they have something in common with Hitler, who I'm not sure Hitler believed in God, but he talked as
in some sense he did. Yeah.
In some sense he did. Yeah. I got some slides here I think you'll like actually after this. This is my favorite because it has Satan in it.
Sorry, and Mother Teresa.
And Mother Teresa, yeah. So anyways, I think that at least you're it sounds like you're kind of understanding why. I hope you understand why this is, I think, important, not just for me, but just for thinking clearly about who you are. For me, this is valuable because it helps me concentrate in a conversation on one thing at a time without skipping to something else easily, right? And I do think it really can help a conversation to, like if I'm talking with my dad and I say, but you believe this and this, but I'm not like those people who believe X, Y, or Z.
Right.
That's frustrating to me. And I always wondered what that was. Why should I be frustrated with that? Well, now I have a name for it. Mm-hmm. I have a way to say, I'm not interested in saying you're like those people. That's
not my question.
it's not a question about whether you're likable or not. That's a distraction from the question of truth, right?
Right.
Of what's true. And so it seemed like likability seems like a moot point on questions of truth to me. It just seems obvious that if we're worried about whether we like each other or not, that actually can really get in the way of whether we can make sense together or not, right? In some way. It's helpful emotionally, but as far as whether, I'm not a fan of Osama bin Laden, right? I'm not a fan. So because I think he's a theist and my dad is a theist, I'm going to feel the same way about my dad. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like,
well, and I think that's part of the question that's worth asking. Why does it not? And that
why does it not? Why does it not make sense to me?
Well, because it's of the association of the other things that.
Well, I mean, it makes sense to me.
What that also means for him to be a theist. Like, there's a whole
right, yeah,
range of,
right. Well, like Shauna and I disagree about lots of things, but we're still married, right? Like, it has no bearing on what's actually real or true or what's happened. How I feel, and so what I have been frustrated by when in this situation where people are associating something, using association as a way to navigate a conversation, it feels like that we're not on the same page on one arena. What we're doing with this conversation. If we want to have this conversation be about affirming each other, like when you and I have talked about very personal life matters, right? Like, it's not a same kind of conversation. It's something very different. We're not sitting around wondering, well, what's true here? It's more like, I'm suffering in life, or I'm not feeling great about X, Y, or Z, and I'm sharing it, right? It's more about creating intimacy and hoping to find some relief in life, maybe, right?
Right.
But if that's our common goal, then I'm not interested in asking you whether A is non-A or not. That seems like out of place with that context. But if I want to ask a question about what my dad or somebody thinks is true, this becomes really, really helpful on that pursuit. It opens the door to making sure we're not jumping off the page and missing each other, which is, I think, actually harder to do in a conversation about truth than it is in most other kinds of contexts. Like, when we're talking about my suffering in life, there's nothing really at stake, in a sense, for the other person, usually not in the same way. And so there's not as much defensiveness, maybe, I'm not sure. It just seems different to me. But if we're talking about truth, and then my dad's like, well, I'm not like Osama bin Laden. He's not like, I agree. I thought we were talking about something else, and now we're talking about whether you're like Osama bin Laden. And that's not what I was wondering. I just want to know if you believe in a God, and you're nice, he's not. That's not a thing about whether it's true or not. So it really is helpful.
Well, but I mean, part of it confuses me a little bit, because that he believes in a God, right?
Sure. So when I was explaining this, I was explaining my relationship to theism, not his. But that kept coming up, not because I wanted to talk about it, but because he didn't want the association he seemed to get from it, right? Like, I think he wanted to identify with me and say, I have doubts too. And I'm thinking, well, of course, I had doubts when I was a believer as well. Like, I'm finding this valuable because it helps me understand where I am in relation to the question of theism. That's it. Nothing else. And all of a sudden, we got off the rails on all this other stuff about what they believed, where they were on the mix. They didn't want to be on this. They didn't want this to be true for them, even if I felt like it was true for me. for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't want, they felt like it was me pigeonholing them maybe, or that I'm associating my dad with Osama bin Laden. Well, why can't I be over here? I don't like that I have to be X or not X, right? And I'm thinking, well, I'm not saying you have to be. I'm saying it's just a statement of reality. It's not personal. It's not. It's just saying that if you're a theist, you're a theist. That's the first law of identity. If you're not a theist, you can't be both a theist and not a theist at the same time. That's
Right.
That's non-contradiction. You can only be either a theist or not or a non-theist. Those are the only two options. That's it. If you're on the fence, that's not being a theist. That's being on the fence. It's something different than being a theist. So you're not it. It's not the opposite. It's not saying you reject. You're taking theism and saying I can't imagine it making sense. It just means you're not at the moment in the fence.
Right.
Inside the fence is probably the better, more accurate term. In the fence and on is a little poetically convenient, but
right.
So here's the question of vagueness, which I think was more Janine's concern, right? I think she was more concerned about the feeling of, well, there's other options, right, than just A and not A. Well, there's lots of them. It's not fair to say that I have to be certain or not certain, but you do. You're either certain or you're not. You're either A or you're not, whatever it is that you put an A. And all of these gradations are irrelevant to the question. So the problem of vagueness doesn't threaten the question of the law of excluded middle in any way. It's not relevant to it. If A is 2, then 0, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are all not A. 2.1 is not 2. 2.00 to the 100th place 0.1 is not 2. Everything is either 2 or not 2. That's all it says. That seems pretty obvious to me, right? If I'm 50-50, you're on the fence. I don't know. I'm not hardcore. I'm not sure or certain. Whatever if you're 50-50, then you're 50-50, and everybody who's not 50-50 is not A. So if A is 50-50, then a believer who's 51% is not A, and a doubter who's 49% is not A.
Right.
And then there's an infinite number of other possibilities, like 49.752, 49.329. Like, I mean, it's just, don't make me say it. ... ellipses.
Right.
So it's just stating facts about, how reality works if you accept the law of identity, because both other laws stem from the law of identity. If A equals A, then it can't equal not A.
Right.
And so if A is warm, then everything else is not warm. What about cold? Well, it's not warm. What about lukewarm? Well, it's not warm. It's lukewarm.
Right.
What about hot? It's not warm. It's not trying to tell you that you have to, there's no other options than warm. It's saying that everything else, every other option you come up with that isn't warm. It's a tautology. It's so non-threatening in any way that way, but it feels that way, and I get it. It just doesn't work that way. So if everything,
and in a one way, you're asking somebody to make asking them to make a statement about where are you. And
that's right. That's the hard part. Yeah.
Right. And it may be that it's very, like, I can imagine it being tricky or not uncomfortable to kind of name exactly if it is that question of fluctuation where it's not, where you can certainly say like the palm of my hand right in the very center is kind of cool, if that's what blue indicates. Right. And that is the case right now. But usually when we talk about identity, we're talking about something more immutable, right? Like, I'm always Ryan. supposedly.
Well, yeah, I mean,
And
you're either,
so,
yeah, you're always Ryan, but it's a conceptual argument, right? It's not saying
yeah,
that there isn't fluidity. So it's like the painting metaphor that I wrote in my email to you, I think is helpful, where people will say, well, what if in my mind I have love and hate for somebody at the same time? Well, then you're somebody who has love and hate for that person at the same time, and you either have that feeling or you don't. Like you're not somebody else at that point. You're that person, and that's all it's saying. It's not trying to tell you that to break with reality or say that there aren't strange things or complications. So the mind is pretty complicated. If love and hate can go down the exact same electrons in your neurons in your brain at the same time that love can, then that might be a contradiction.
Right.
But that's not how it happens. You can feel two things at the same time and have one brain, but they're not traveling down the exact same electron. The electron that produces the feeling of love, the love that you're having, is not the same one you're producing the hate. They don't happen either at the same time or in the same place.
But it doesn't matter, because that's not how we experience identity. Like we experience identity in the sense of not a flashpoint.
Well,
what is or is not the case at a single moment.
But this still applies. It still applies. So if you have like a painting, you are like a painting. You have a brain that kind of frames your experience. Right. And if you have black in one corner and white in another, there's no contradiction in that.
Right.
That it is what it is. How this applies there is you are whatever is in the frame of what is you, or you're not. Everybody else is not that frame. Only you are that frame. A or not A. Like, you're either Ryan or you're not Ryan, whatever that is, like however you want to define Ryan. Whatever you put into that definitional sack is wrong. And if there's something in somebody else's sack that is not Ryan, is not in your sack, then they're not Ryan. Right. Even if all the other percentages are identical or whatever. So it is really just trying to tell you how the most fundamental things about reality and put it into language. It's just a way of speaking about what seems to be happening.
And I think maybe part of it is that it feels like it kind of tries to tidy, or that it involves a tidying things up into a this or that.
It's not, and it's not saying this. So it is saying
like
this,
I'm either this or I'm that, where that, the one may experience more of a fluctuation, such that it's hard to figure out exactly where.
Well, it doesn't. It's again, I think that's missing it, right? Because you are a person who has lots of fluctuations, or you're not.
Yeah, definitely. But the thing is that you're using it to invite somebody to identify themselves. And
so if they identify themselves as somebody who and they say honestly what they believe, if they just say, I honestly don't, I feel like I go in and out of this circle, but then they're not somebody who is consistently. Well, if we say let's redefine theism, then a theist is somebody who is consistently a theist. Right. And fix a time frame, whatever that time frame is that you want to talk about.
Right.
And then you have a better gauge for whether you're an A or not. And you can go, you know what? I think I am, because I feel like that 52% of the time I am floating around the inside, and the rest I'm not. So in general, I fit the category of A, right?
Right.
It helps that it doesn't hinder you from figuring out who you are. It only hinders you from hiding who you are.
Right.
It pushes you into a position of having to be honest at the moment and try to figure out what that is. Even if you admit, like, that right now, I'm not entirely sure whether I know where I fit at all. I feel like that it's too complicated for me to locate myself. Well, you've done your job. You've been honest, and that honesty has rewarded you with a position outside of A.
Right. Well, and then that would be the argument. I'm not so sure that that is outside of A.
Right. Okay. So where is you decide? You tell me where it is, and then that's what it is, right? Like whatever the mark is, your attempt right now to avoid there being a place where you're inside or outside is irrelevant to whether there is or isn't an inside or outside. Right. So to me, that's an evasion of honesty. Not it's an ethical problem and an intellectual one. Where now, should people have the right to hide? Absolutely. Like, I'm not trying to tell people that they have to tell me the truth, but when they say things like, well, I don't buy this. Okay. Okay.
Right.
Conversation over. Like, how do we have a conversation that's honest and meaningful if you're not letting the truth of the matter affect you in any way? How like, just if somebody just gets rid of all of these metaphors, these images right now, that's A and not A, they get rid of that and they just say what they really feel. And then you come in with this after it. If they say tell the truth, this applies. If they don't, it's not very. If they don't want to, then it's not very helpful, right? Then it feels like an obstacle. Then it feels like an obstacle. Then it feels like you're being pantsed. Like, I think that this makes people feel like they're having their pants pulled down. So I feel like what this has helped me do is learn how to feel more comfortable with put everything that I feel at whatever moment I feel it on the table for investigation, and not have anything that I'm afraid might not stand up to scrutiny. I want to live in a world where I'm not afraid anymore. And so this relieves me from the burden of, teaches me how to put everything on the table so that I don't have hiding places that I'm scared of anymore because they haunt me. Right. So like the idea of whether I believe or not. Well, there were times where I didn't want to confess that I believed something because the person I was talking to seemed to know more than me. And I kind of got the feeling that if I put my belief out there, I would probably go home with more doubts than that person would.
Right.
Well, this would not have been fun for me to have this in front of me. If you get what I'm saying, like him telling me that I am this or that on any issue, and I can't be not this or that. I would have found that hard. And I wouldn't have wanted to answer I'm A in some cases. Yes, I believe that that Jesus was born of a virgin. I always felt uncomfortable with that one, like for biblical reasons and not. There's something embarrassing about admitting it.
Right.
Well, but I believed it. I just didn't want to admit it. So the way around that is to say, I don't buy this, that I have to be one or the other.
Right.
Try to find a way to compromise and to feel good with the person who wanted to know what I really believed. So anyways, on this one was really just to try to help my sister understand that I wasn't telling her she couldn't be in a bunch of gray areas. Like, if belief is, if belief, if she puts belief at 5 right here, like right down the middle,
right,
everybody on this side is that's where she feels like people are convinced to varying degrees. If that's the mark where all of a sudden, this is where people start to believe, to be in the fence. Then all of these infinite number of possibilities are outside, and all of these infinite number of possibilities are inside, and they're infinite. There's no challenge to infinity. There's no saying you're one thing and not another. Nothing about you has to change for this to be true. It isn't true because it's forcing. It's sort of like the difference between saying that gravity happens because of the law, It doesn't happen because of the law. The law of gravity is our way of trying to represent the truth about reality.
Right.
Right. It's just a framing. And so it comes in after the fact in the same way. So gravity existed before the law of gravity existed. Now, the law of gravity was something we came up with to explain something that was already there. What controls what the law of gravity is? Actual gravity, not the words we use to describe it. And we often misapproximate, and at least through in an inductive process by comparison to a logical process.
Right.
So these laws don't determine the nature of reality. These laws are determined by the nature of reality. And if they fail, they fail because reality tells us that they fail to represent it. In other words, if they are wrong, we're not listening very well. I think these are you don't need reality to be anything in particular for these to be true, because you can start with just the fact that it's impossible for me to exist and not exist at the same time, and I exist as a certain 100% fact. I'm certain of it. It's the only thing I feel comfortable saying I'm certain of, because what I am, whether I'm a computer simulation or actual matter, or whether my consciousness is in my brain, or whatever it is irrelevant to the question of whether I exist or not. I exist or I don't, and I do.
Right.
So that is the basis of these laws. It doesn't have to be, it's not induction. It's not the same as a sort of scientific process of understanding what appears to be outside of us. But could be a mental, idealism could be true, and these laws still apply. Gravity could be something I create with my mind.
Right.
But these laws still apply to reality, whatever reality is, even if it's an illusion, even if reality is illusory.
Right.
So it doesn't need matter in that sense. I mean, I don't think there is anything else. I am not convinced there is anything else but matter. But it doesn't matter what matter is. It applies to whatever is.
Right.
Unless we don't have to make sense. And that's where I think faith often steps in, is at the moment why I see it as a bad thing, is because people can say things like you'll see in the argument. I asked this dialogue on the blog, this guy said, do you believe that God has chosen this world, and that he could have chosen another? He had options. He could have chosen a world in which I'm the non-believer, I'm the believer, and he's the one destined for eternal damnation. And he had to say yes, that God is in charge. He made a choice, and this was the one he wanted. And so then that is logically incompatible with the idea of free will. Then it's not my responsibility that I'm doing what I'm doing, because God chose a world in which I would do this. He could have chosen a world in which I didn't do this, but he chose this one. And it was his brainchild. He knew about it beforehand. So it's not logically possible to believe in a God that is all powerful and omniscient and have free will. It doesn't, and be responsible for what you do. You can't, it's not possible, logically possible. That's an impossibility, but people believe it anyways. And they say, well, I defer to God on this. I just, I don't know stuff. I could be wrong. So God knows. And therefore, that to me is the worst element of faith, is when there's evidence to the contrary and people go, well, and then call that humility, right? Call it humility to place yourself in the context of an eternal cosmic plan, and call that humility.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I see that as an ethical, not just an intellectual problem.
Yeah, I think probably, and I think one of the things that maybe one of the senses in which I react to this is not is not actually a refutation of these laws at all, but perhaps a particular use of them. Like even the attractiveness of a Buddhist notion of interbeing, for example.
What is that notion? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I mean that I am a body, not not earth, or not a cloud, or name whatever you
Sure.
want to name. And at the same time, there is a sense of continuity where the existence of this body doesn't have any meaning or even a possibility apart from the fact that there are clouds that provide rain, which I consume, in water or in the plants that I eat, and so in some sense, there is kind of the distinction between me and a cloud is not an absolute distinction, but on some kind of a level, or for some kind of context for making decisions, or for deciding what I'm going to do, or for like there is a context in which differentiation makes a lot of, is essential.
Well, people who doubted these laws, they're all dead, right? Like our ancestors who believed that a bus it was not actually a bus, they didn't make it, right? Like they didn't.
Well, but do you follow what I'm saying?
I think I was trying to riff on the practical element of it.
Right. Yes, that's right. Yes, on the practical.
I was just trying to riff on I was just building
your
idea that there's a practical element to this.
Yeah. So in some sense, a bus doesn't exist, not in a fundamental, eternal kind of way, but.
Well, yeah, and nothing.
I can't live by that, because if I cross the street and don't think that thing that's moving towards me.
So in some sense, what you're saying is these are imposed categories, and I don't think that's I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with that argument. So like obviously there is rain. There was water in me that was some point rain, likely, right? There's molecules in me. So these differentiations, maybe on a fundamental level, may be mythological, right? But it doesn't affect this at all. It's not related.
No.
It's not a related. In other words, it's not a related. It's not.
It's not about ultimate. It's not about. It's not necessarily.
It has no bearing on what's fundamentally happening, like in the sense that, like, whether really the distinction between me and you is real. It's this still can apply without that being.
Because that is either that is the case or it is not the case.
That's right, exactly. And that move that you just made is the crucial one, not to rescuing these concepts, but to their value.
Right.
Like that they're only valuable in that they do that for you.
Right.
And so what a lot of people want to say is that we don't need we need a bigger foundation for knowledge. We need God for example, otherwise we can't make sense of the world. Then there's no grounds for our epistemology. There's no grounds for knowledge without a God there. And so what these do is I don't think these need there to be a God to be true, because we can start with on the basis of I think, therefore the cogito, right? Like I think, therefore I am, and that's sufficient to come to an understanding of our knowledge. Now, is it absolute? Is it possible that A isn't A in some instances? I can't imagine. It's not logically possible, but I don't see logic as determining reality. I see logic as only useful in terms of how it helps us understand it, what it is or what's possible. And so these are heuristics, And there may be, there obviously is no absolute distinction between me and the sun, like, but there are differences that, at least to our perceptions, we can track in what that seem real to me, right? Like that, even if the sun is illusory, and or I am made of the stuff of the sun, the stuff that's in me, I don't. My hunch is not the same stuff right now that is the stuff in the sun.
Right.
So one atom is not another atom; it's that atom. Even if that atom is made up of a mental construction in my brain can't construct something that is what it is and isn't what it is. We can't even conceive of that.
Right.
Like, it's like trying to conceive the idea of nothing. How could there be nothing? Like, that's not, construct that. It's impossible. Like, you can't.
Yeah. Right. I'm thinking about like there are senses in which an A suddenly becomes not A when we look at it from a different angle. Like, if you show me a picture of myself when I was 2 years old and ask me, hey, is that you? In one sense, I can say, I don't have any cells in common with
right, and you don't.
That thing.
Yeah. So you could make a case that that's
say, no, that's not me.
and it isn't.
Yeah, it isn't me. And it is me. And then in another kind of a context, what you're asking me is that,
right.
Is there a continuity between the body that you have now and that body?
It depends on how you want to speak about yourself, but it still applies. It helps us apply a way of thinking. Yeah. So, like, for example, if you want to say that picture of you is not you, it isn't. Yeah. We can demonstrate that in the present, right? Because that picture is made up of different materials than you are.
Yeah, that's a flat piece of paper.
That's not me. What is wrong?
Yeah, you idiot.
Right? Like, if
I'm not that guy that in that picture.
No. In fact, I don't think there is an actual person there. I think it's a piece of paper, right? And so it depends what angle you want to go with this. But you have to parse. It forces you to parse out what you're talking about in a refined way, not by pretending that there isn't a context in which all of these things happen, but so that when you're talking about that thing, you're not talking out your ass about whatever you want to be true can be true if you ignore this, right? And if you want to understand truth, that seems irresponsible to me.
Yeah, right.
And so why did I value these ideas? Not because they pigeonhole my dad, but because if I want to understand my dad would have to give into these to really, for both of us to sink into who we are with each other and what we're really thinking.
Right.
Not because I'm forcing him to, but because I have had to force myself to find how to be as honest as I know how to be. Without these, it is hard for me to be honest.
Right.
It gets harder. This puts constraints, limits the amount of hiding I can do if I let these into my thought process and become conscious of them. Not just when it's convenient in an argument against somebody, but when I'm also trying to understand myself in return. And so it becomes a way to self-reflect and not be in that shadowy spot while somebody else is in the light, which is often what I try to do in arguments. Is I won't recognize that I'm not clear about where I am and try to expose somebody else. This is not fair. This is not an honest conversation unless I'm in the light too.
Right.
And so how do I get in the light? This is how I do it.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you think about it as an ethical move, an attempt to be in a world, have moments with people where we really are. I get to know. If you want me to really understand you, this is a great way to do it, right? Like, and a great way to do it that makes it hard for each of us, puts bumper lines on the bowling alley, so that we're not throwing the thing down different lanes whenever we feel like not throwing it down the one we're on currently.
Yeah. I think what this doesn't necessarily guard against is, and can't, is if the definitions that you're using or
don't comport with reality. Yeah.
Or you're using, you're not realizing that you're not sharing a definition.
That's right. Exactly.
And,
yeah. That's why in philosophy classes often, like I haven't had too many, but what I've noticed is that the philosophers seem to want to start with definitions, right?
right.
That seems responsible to me, because the next step is okay. Now what we have those. When I say I'm talking about a star, I'm not talking about Faith Hill. I'm talking
Right.
about,
yes, that's right. Yeah.
And when you're talking about a star, we're talking about the same thing. Otherwise, the syllogism is like gets fucked up. It's like,
right.
The sun, stars are a burning ball of gas. Faith Hill is a star, therefore Faith Hill is a burning ball of gas.
Right.
And the reason I like that particular form of syllogism, the standard model, is because it helps us expose whether we're talking about the same A or not.
Right.
Because by the end of it, we'll know for sure.
Right.
Right. If the A we're talking about is the same. So that's the next stage of epistemological engagement is working on the syllogism, and then induction can come in after that. And those models, the reason I like those models is because I know how hard it was for me to know the difference, to separate out what I might want or fear to be true,
right,
what I could actually demonstrate to be true, and to have the wherewithal to accept what I didn't know, and that be my final answer on that
right.
issue, and not, well, since nobody knows, then I'm going to believe, right? Not do that, like, and be modest and when I say modest, obviously, I hope I don't mean like I'm a modest person. I'm a pretty excessive person, but I mean modest structurally, like intellectually, epistemologically, like cautious about what I'm willing to commit to as a belief.
Right.
It may be true that on a subatomic level, these laws fall apart, but there's no real reason to believe that yet. And so I withhold my belief in that and don't go, well, the quantum level is amazing, and so therefore these rules don't apply. It may be true.
Yeah.
But I don't know enough yet to say that. And even if it is true, it could be true on that level and not true on the level of our experience at all. They could be totally unrelated levels.
I think the other confusion that comes up, or where maybe I react to some of this, is also in this sense of where, well, I'm thinking about, for example, somebody asking me, well, they're wanting to share an experience that has to do with what they believe was a ghost, and their question is, do you believe in ghosts? And I think really what they're asking is, can I tell you this, and you won't scoff at me, or you can honor my experience, or you can still see me as a valid, see my perspective as valid once I tell you this.
Yeah.
And so it's a hard one for me to answer sometimes, because clearly, no, I don't. I do not believe in ghosts. Does that mean there are no ghosts? No, it doesn't mean that there aren't ghosts.
You're just not yet convinced.
I'm not convinced at all, and it seems likely to me that there are not.
Right.
And but I'm not. I don't know for a fact that there are no ghosts, and I would really like to hear your story. And I'm genuinely interested in what your experience is and was, and I'm inclined to give some validity to it, whether it's the validity is that yes, that is truth. That's not necessarily what I'm.
Or that's true to your experience, right?
Yeah, that's right. And,
okay, so what you just did,
that your experience was really scary, and yeah.
Well, what you just did is what I feel like is so great about this is that it allows me to find a position where I don't have to claim the opposite to reject.
Yeah.
As
I was, yeah, I know. As I was going through that, that does fit very much what you were describing about.
Well, it's
not
such
having
a
to say there is no God.
Well, to me, it's such a relief because then I didn't have to carry the burden. Because if you think about the concept of like the burden of truth, like how you find the burden of truth on any question, why should somebody carry the burden of evidence as opposed to somebody else?
Right.
The only way that became a very satisfying. This logic helped me feel comfortable with understanding where I felt the burden of proof should be because of the nature of the a not a question. So, like just like I've said before, I know you've heard me say this, but it really framed it well for me is the idea. Matt Dillahunty and others do it. It's where they say, saying not guilty, somebody's not guilty of a murder, is not saying that you believe they're innocent. You're just saying there's not sufficient warrant based on the evidence to convict guilty.
Right.
So you can reject guilt without embracing innocence.
Right.
And so to me, this is the same logical dynamic where if God is somebody may believe that God is guilty of existing. I'm just saying not guilty. I'm not saying God is innocent of existing. How could I demonstrate that? Like what evidence, where could I find that God, what evidence could I produce that there isn't a God somewhere?
Right.
Like, how could I even do that? That's not responsible. Now, yeah. I think that you could make a case that certain gods don't exist because they're logically incompatible.
Right.
Or logically inconsistent or logically impossible in some cases. And so then people just go, well, I don't trust logic, I trust God or whatever, right? I trust the Bible more than I trust logic, and that's fine. But that's faith. That's not logic, right? That's not
right. And I think the tricky thing here is also just the nature of language too. Is that I can say the same thing, and it can mean very different. It could have very different meanings. I can say, I don't believe in ghosts, or I don't believe in God. And, well, what are you saying when you say that? Because I'm not saying,
you saying you believe
I'm not saying that I think that you must be, you must not be capable of reason if you really.
Right. Well, I wouldn't want to do that because most of the people I know who are smarter than me are theists, right? So it's not not a reasonable thing to say. But
it is. But sometimes people use those words, and that's what they're communicating. And
the only question there is I don't that's not my style either. I don't prefer to make fun of people, but I did. Like recently on a YouTube conversation, like just in the threads or whatever, there was somebody who came on and said that they thought I was in over my head. So I said, hey, okay, well, what did I say? It's possible. I'd like to find out if I'm in over my head or if I've missed something. And I asked them to show me what it is that was a basis for their claim that I'm in over my head.
Right.
And it was a series of like 10 responses with the person refusing to do it,
right.
refusing to offer an evidence for their claim. And by the end of it, I kept saying, no, what I'm arguing is that I think it's irresponsible to make ontological claims. And I think this person didn't actually understand what that meant.
Or both of you were over your head.
Yeah. Well,
it's like if I tell you that, Chad, you don't understand quantum mechanics, and then you ask me to explain them to you.
Well, yeah. So what I was saying, the only problem with that is I was taking the most absolute minimal position. Like I was saying, I have no idea, and you're saying I do, and now you're saying I don't understand what I'm saying, right? It's okay. So tell me where I'm making a claim that exceeds the bounds of reasonableness. Just tell me. I'll take it. And then by the end of this, the person was all of a sudden throughout there, I can tell you what the nature of reality is, and literally said they can, and sent me a video link where they've been interviewed on some talk show or something. I'll take a look at it. I'm curious. And then said that water is the medium between the spiritual and the material. And I thought this person was joking. Like, I thought it was a joke. So I said, yeah, that water thing is hilarious. I can't tell if it doesn't seem like you're serious, but that seems ridiculous.
Right. Oops.
Oops. And then the person said that there was, they showed this evidence from a Japanese guy. I've actually seen the video on it before. I've read some of the article when I was in grad school and stuff. And it basically tries to show that when you have a certain mood, water will crystallize in a beautiful way. And when you're in a negative mood, water will crystallize and look ugly. Right. And saying our emotions have a immaterial impact. So this person was saying that there's a spiritual that demonstrates that the spiritual exists. Right. Which is not even what the author was saying. So it was like, and then I had to retract and go, okay, I'm open. Like that, to that being evidence. And they sent me a link to a video of somebody doing it in their home. Right. On a YouTube video as evidence. And I'm like, well, why is the Templeton Foundation, who would love to pay millions of dollars to have this validated, not taking this seriously? Right. Like and the scientific community, they're not opposed to making millions of dollars by demonstrating something that would blow open the universe of our understanding, right? Like you go to a conference and tell me that
if it's this easy to prove that, then
like if you could do this in your house. I just said I need a more rigorous method. I said before I'm willing to commit. I said I'm open. You're the one that's actually closed here. You're committed. You're saying it's true. I'm just saying I'm not convinced without better evidence. And so the person was trying to. So in other words, this allows me to figure out where I am really in the position and demonstrate the modesty that I feel comfortable with. Right. Even if as a person, I'm not a modest person all the time, I can systemically, methodologically be modest. Right. Right. Like, and that's why I value science, because a lot of the people I'd see at conferences are assholes. But as soon as they get in front of a crowd and they have to prove what they're saying, they get very cautious. Right. Right. But that's not what's happening at church on Sundays, right? Where the humble pastor, a person you love and can feel connected to, maybe who's a nicer person and more humble as a person than this scientist, is claiming to understand how the universe began, right? And demonstrating a lot of immodesty. And that's why I don't trust faith as a model of coming to true conclusions. It's right. It's a promiscuous bedfellow. It'll sleep with anybody. Right. Yeah, it'll sleep with anything you want to believe. It's like, yes, yep. It has no discriminating force. Right. Yeah. Well, if you believe your pancakes are the body of Christ, I'm okay with that.
I guess you do.
I guess it is. Yeah. But anyways, this is the last one, Ryan. Not that you need to see this, but this one got more personal because it's the Law of Excluded Middle. This is the one where it's the hardest for me. It is for me and for others to accept, is this either you have the black and white fallacy or the either or fallacy. And people see this as black or white, and it's not. The black or white fallacy is talking about something totally different. And so I try to prove that here. You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. That's just false. That's not true. That's not what this is about. This is not telling you that you can only be one or the other. Right. Not in that sense. It's saying that's false. What about neutral? All this is saying is that if you're neutral, then you're neutral and you're not neutral at the same time. That's it. Right. Right. It's so this is false. Right. Whoever is not with me is against me. Jesus needed a 101 logic course, right? This is not true. I mean, it could be true from his perspective. He could say that, and then it'd be true that if you're not for me, you're against me. And then he, but logically it's false. It's not actually true. There are people who could be neutral. What if you're for him on some things, neutral on some things, and against some things, right? There's an infinite number of possibilities. And this has nothing to do with whether that's, this actually supports the claim that this is false. This helps you understand that this is not true, because there are an infinite number of possible things you could be in relation to whoever Jesus is. And then he says, no one can serve two masters. That's not true. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will devote to one and despise the other. This is logically false. It's just not, you cannot serve both God and money. That's not true. Maybe for God, it's not true. From God's perspective, he's going to decide that you can't do that and say anybody who serves money and me at the same time doesn't serve me. He could determine that, but that's a subjective determination, not a logical reality.
Right.
So it's logically false. So Matthew, and the Bible is loaded with those kinds of false claims. You can love both. You can love one and not the other. And so I was trying to show my sister that the book that we're questioning as an atheist is actually the one that's pigeonholing people, not these laws.
Right.
You're wrong. You're misunderstanding. This is different. It's not saying it's either black or white. This actually helps us understand that it's not either black or white.
Right. That's an interesting move.
Yeah. So I was trying to show her that what you're thinking it's actually working against. It's actually militating against the very thing you think it's doing to you.
Right.
If it weren't for this, you couldn't question this. You'd have no basis upon which to say this is false. This is false, and we can demonstrate it because of this.
Right. Right.
These laws are the things that ensure that you and I don't have to believe that this makes sense.
Right.
That there's an either or proposition in that sense. It's not true.
Right.
Now, if we were to bring in, if there are different binaries where that breaks down, like for example, even or odd, whenever there's only two options built into the definition, then it's either or, right? So like there can only either be an even number of stars in the universe or odd, right? If you have half a star, well,
right.
That's a different issue. It's unrelated to whether there's an even or odd.
Right.
But I don't have to, if somebody says there's an even number, I don't have to believe them. But if I don't believe them, that doesn't mean I believe there's an odd number. Right?
Yeah.
I don't have to believe that to reject the claim that there's an even.
Yeah.
That's just and that's where this steps in to help us understand that particular binary, which is actually dual. It is dual, but not all binaries are dual. Black and white is not. Warm, hot, and cold are not. Those have a deal with the question of vagueness.
Right. Yeah.
This one, this is not a false dichotomy. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. You're lukewarm. I wish you were either one or the other. So far, all of this is fair, right?
Yeah.
So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. That is sensible. I'm like, well, I'm choosing not to like people who are not hot.
Right.
And the lukewarm are included in that.
Right.
So that this one is actually applying the law of excluded middle appropriately and making a claim about, well, you're either A or you're not A. You're lukewarm. Don't pretend that you're hot. I only want hot. And lukewarm and cold are identical logically to me.
Right. Right.
And so this does not break. This is not a false dichotomy. These are false dichotomies. They haven't broken down the binary that they're dealing with far enough to so something is either against you or it's not against you. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. That's a shift. You're either part of the solution or you're not part of the solution. That doesn't mean you're part of the problem. You don't have to be part of the problem to be not part of the solution.
Right. And of course, it has a certain meaning in a certain context.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
There was logic, but as a statement that you just hold.
Well, I think what the book is trying to say is what Jesus is trying to say is I'm not interested in I'm not interested in sharing you with anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
There's no sharing. If you're sharing, you're not for me,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, right? And that's God's right to do that.
Right.
We've got to love him with all our heart and our soul and our mind and our strength.
Or wanting to see some kind of an action when it comes to solution, part of the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. So logically, there's a point being made here that is compatible with reality, but it's still the point conveys. So in that sense,
Right.
it's judging it according to logic is unfair, right? It's not a very, it's kind of petty, right? Because maybe Jesus did understand logic. If he was God,
Right.
hopefully he did, right? But he was doing something different.
Yeah, and I think what you're doing with these statements anyway is more about making a comment about who's making dichotomies here, or where the dichotomies are being.
Well, and just the fact that this is not involved in what your intuition is correct, that life isn't either or.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is black and white fallacy is a real thing, but the reason the black and white fallacy is a fallacy is because these are true, not because they're false.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah.
See what I mean? Yeah. These actually.
Because you're making a statement. Yeah.
Right. Like if my dad really wanted to demonstrate the black and white fallacy, like that life is not black and white, he's doing so because he's obeying these laws of logic, not because he's disobeying them, not because they're false. Yeah. They're not part of the problem. They're actually the thing that validates. Like anytime you're applying exposing the black and white fallacy, you're exposing it by using one of the laws of logic.
Right. Right.
So
it's very possible. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, in a way, it had looked to me like you were trying to force a statement, and I think that your family can still stay with this and say, Chad, yes, that's all true. And the statement that you wanted me to make, I'm not going to make because this, I see this true of me.
Sure. Like, the statement that I want them to make is whatever it is they believe.
Right, exactly.
So I'm not like the confusion is that they thought I was trying to tell them they had to be a theist. Well, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I just want to know what you are. I just want to know what you are. And once we do, then we can place you using this method. It's just a helpful framing. And it's not, as far as I can tell, it's the closest thing to immutable that I know.
Mm-hmm.
Besides that, I know I exist, but that's a very private thing. This we can share. My existence is something that you have to kind of count on inductively, but you don't need these laws of law. You don't need me to exist at all for these logical logic to apply to you if you're the only person who exists in your head.
Right.
These laws of logic apply to you whether I exist to you or not, whether I'm real or not. Right. So they are true whether, no matter what you do, they're not trying to be over the truth. They're trying to represent it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the hard part, is trying to get and I didn't anticipate it. I actually only use these laws because I thought, well, it's obvious, right? Like nobody's going to really have a problem with this. Like I didn't bring them up because I thought the law of excluded middle would be contentious. I wasn't trying to do what it started to feel like I was doing to them. I didn't even think of that. I wasn't thinking I need them to tell me to be X, Y, admit that they're X, Y, or Z. I just was trying to confess what I truly was, and this was the model that helped me do that.
Helped me to do that. Yeah. I see that, and I
ended up having to defend it because I think they wanted to say, well, it's true. Maybe you feel like it's true for you, but I don't feel like I fit into that for me.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I don't know what's happening, but why this is a problem. But it was hard. By the end, I figured out some things, but it was only on reflection afterwards I figured out, why is there resistance to me talking about things this way? I actually expected it to be a very useful common ground.
Right.
And I think it should be. I think it is a really cool place for us, for people who disagree on anything, to find common ground. Because actually, when you listen to debates, like I just listened to one while I was driving between a couple of guys, Matt Dillahunty and Dyer. What was his name? Dyer. He's not Catholic. He's Greek, or he's Orthodox, not Greek. He's Orthodox, traditional Orthodox, but he's also an apologist, and he's a presuppositionalist, which are the most frustrating people to listen to in terms of arguments. But it was a thoughtful conversation, and they both had common ground on that. These laws are, as far as they can tell, immutable. There was no question there. It was more a matter of whether you had grounds to say that or not as an atheist, right? How can you make that claim unless there's a God making it true?
Well, yeah, it is an interesting kind of a thing for a Christian to argue against this, because to me, this would be something that would make more sense for someone who questions truth, period, which is not what a Christian does.
No, so, but what Christians see in this, in my opinion, so far, like I don't speak for Christians,
right,
is what I can recognize in debates and stuff, is the reason that these are very important to them is because they feel like the universe makes sense because God has made it so.
I see what you mean,
right? And so these laws are actually abstract. They exist independently from human minds, right? They're they're elements of the mind of God.
Right.
And the atheist has no basis, no ground to stand on, because they don't believe there's just a universe, and it's indiscriminate, and you don't know what's out there. You don't know whether it's real or not, and you have no grounding. But claiming that God is a final base is the same as saying, well, the universe could be the determining this, right? Like whatever the universe is, it could be eternal, and it could be what is determining this, right? So you don't need a God for that. I think it's not true, but.
Well, I think you can even go from a pragmatic position that in order for us to investigate whether something works or not, these are essential kind of terms.
Yeah, well, and whether
it either works to a particular end or it doesn't.
Yeah, whether you're making sense or not.
Yeah.
15? Okay, no problem, Sadie. I'm on it. I'm glad. I set an alarm for 10 too. So
all right.
I got 15 minutes. I got time. So anyway, what's that?
But I should go actually, because
you have to go now. Okay, no problem.
I have to make supper. And I just
thanks for taking the time to listen to all this stuff. I'm sure it's not a super exciting topic for you. I think for me, it's just more, I want to feel like that it understood. That's it. It was more like I'm not saying these things because I came up with them, or that somebody else has to obey them, or anything like that. It's more, if you realize what it is, I don't see how anybody wouldn't go, oh, well, wow, we all have this cool common ground to stand on as an initial starting place for an inquiry together, right? That we can all admit that if we want to make sense as a community, that these are our shared common ground. We have one church together. Right?
Well, yeah. Well, I guess what I understood you to be doing with it is trying to force them to say, I'm either this or that.
No, they felt that, and I was trying to actually say, I tried so hard to say, I don't care what it is you are. These aren't telling you what to believe. They're not forcing you to be a theist or not. They're asking you, well, where are you actually at? Well, that feels like scary, because then
Yeah.
You have to actually ask that question. Well, what if I'm a lot of things? That's an evasion. You can be a lot of things, and this applies. If you're, it's not. So instead, it turned into a questioning of these rules instead of, but there, you got to remember too, in the question of theism, for somebody who, like you and I, who has sufficient doubts to feel uncomfortable saying we're convinced that God exists, that a God exists, there's a lot less at stake in the question for us than there is for somebody else.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a lot less at stake for me, for example, because I don't have for a wife, for example, who believes. Then, like, so for example, I have friends where they believe different things, and it's harder for somebody to talk straight about what they believe because they feel like it might hurt their spouse. So they're defensive of them and feel frustrated with this or something like that, right? That happens all the time. And I totally get it. But all I was craving was like honesty, like just say what it is you really think. And this is helpful in that, in a context of honesty, this will bear fruit. And it's so, it's a good ride to take. It's not the only one. There's lots of other ways we could talk, right? But obviously, it's, you know, I'm not pretending that there's no way to self-reflect without these things. But you can't be, I do think that you can't make sense unless you're obeying these rules. You don't have to talk about the rules or reflect on them while you're doing it. But if you made sense, it's because these things are true.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
Do you want to mull it over and maybe have a conversation that just a fun one another time and see if it goes anywhere? Or do you,
well, it wouldn't be so much about these particular laws.
Yeah.
It is more about the relevance of immutable truth, or the pursuit of immutables.
In general, like is it
humility
and humility?
No, immutability.
Oh, immutability. Whether like is there a possible world where these things don't apply, kind of thing? Is that
well, not necessarily where these things don't apply, but where that pursuit of immutable truths can be problematic, or
I see. Yeah, whether it's a good thing to. Are you saying whether these are true or not? Is it a good thing whether we promote them?
No, not necessarily. Just in turn, what does it mean for us to deal with the messiness and the vicissitudes of life, to hold that there are immutable truths? What are we doing when we do that? And are there dangers to that?
That's a good question.
Yeah. And I think
because I guess my argument the whole time here has been that I see these as productive of ethical responsibility, intellectual and ethical responsibility, and maybe there's a question. The question is that really true or not? Like
I don't necessarily think. It'd be interesting to kind of explore that more. But I think these are very helpful ways to have conversations.
Yeah, so I wonder what we would do then, because I think I get where you're going, where there's this idea of being I think the hard part is that people, we feel very suspicious of people who claim to have immutable insight. And I don't like being in that position. I was very reluctant in my conversation with parents to tell them, well, I think, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Right. Like you're actually not understanding this, and I can tell, and I'm really trying hard to get you there. But if you did, you wouldn't see these as a threat. That was my direction. I just didn't know I just couldn't get them there.
Yeah.
But it happens like when I was still teaching. Every class, every time I taught this as part of a course on rhetoric or art or paper writing, where they're trying to make an argument or a claim, teaching these is hard because you will have a whole group that instantly are like on board. They're like, well, yeah, this is obvious. And others be like, nope, it can't be that way. And they have a really hard time doing it. And it actually can, they can still, it's interesting. They'll still apply those rules in their argument and not, it's sort of like they're looking their gift horse in the mouth.
Right. Yeah.
They still.
Well, we can talk a little bit. We can talk more about where it'd be interesting to try to understand what are those people struggling with, and I think there is something valid that they are struggling with, even though it doesn't necessarily play out very well in looking at this, looking at these three laws.
Yeah. Well, I totally understand it. It's not like when I hear it, I don't understand the impulse to go, you can't tell me that that's how things work, and just say that it's immutable.
Well, and there's ways of using this also that could be that can. I mean, I don't think it is fundamentally. It doesn't. In itself, it doesn't permit this, but I can see how someone who holds this may be really yearning for very clear dichotomies, where this doesn't really actually support that, but it can look like it does.
Oh, I see it. So there are moments where if you're using it to pigeonhole somebody, you're misapplying it for one thing, but it could.
Right. Yeah.
There's the authoritarian question that is always an anxiety for me, is I don't feel comfortable telling people things like, sorry, this is immutable, you got to accept it. Right. So that's not the case. I would rather be persuasive and say, I actually do understand, you should reject this if you're not comfortable with it. That is an ethical position that is responsible. Right. And you should, until you if you don't understand it as something valuable, then you should reject it until you do. Right. Like, I actually value that. I think that's important. Yeah. You say, I don't think that my sister resisting it was a bad thing. I thought it was awesome. It's just, I didn't expect it. I honestly had no idea that is what we would talk about. Yeah.
Well, I have to go, Chad, and thank you. I think I've got a bit better sense. I've got a lot better sense of. I think that what I was really struggling with was what are you doing with this? And I think I do have a better sense of that. It's just wanting real, clear, honest conversation.
Oh yeah, like I actually didn't.
Is willing to take a position, and whatever that position is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just say whatever it is at the moment. Like, even if you want to play at a position, that's fine. But you can't if you're going to play honestly, you can't logically refute this and make sense. And the only way you're going to be able to refute these is by using them to refute them.
Right.
Yeah. So, like, how they're a cul-de-sac for intellectual activity, right? There's no route out, as far as I can tell. I'm open to there being one, but if you're getting out, it's because you're cheating the system, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
That's why they're helpful. It's just guardrails for honesty. For me, I've experienced them that way.
Right. Yeah. All right.
Sure,
Thanks for calling, Chad.